right.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jay. All right, so I will just echo what Jason said. Thank you guys for taking the time out of your day to come and hear what I have to say. As you can see from the title of the presentation, this is a divergence from the usual content of our noon rounds. I'm not talking about antimicrobial stewardship at all. Jason asked me if I would be willing to come and present on my experience as a humanitarian pharmacist. So this is the result, squished into 45 minutes. So I think I know everyone. Maybe I don't know Jessica, or maybe more people have joined. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Kristin Schmidt. I am currently an antimicrobial stewardship pharmacist here in Regina. I have worked on and off for the SHA since 2014 in some capacity as a pharmacist. And for the last 6 years, I've also worked on and off as a pharmacist with Doctors Without Borders. So most people would be familiar with the organization in some way, shape, or form. It's actually much more commonly referred to by its French name, Médecins Sans Frontières, and even more commonly by the acronym MSF. So that's how I will refer to it throughout the rest of the presentation. So don't let that throw you off. All right, so let's just dive in. A bit of an outline of what I will talk about today. As I said, it's a lot to squish into 45 minutes. Truthfully, it really doesn't feel like I'm doing it justice, but this is what I got. So I will give just a very general overview of MSF. Who are we? What kind of work do we do? What kind of profiles work for MSF? I will talk specifically about the 4 countries that I have been fortunate enough to have worked in and the projects that I've been a part of. That will be the vast majority of the content. I'll talk specifically about the role of the pharmacist. It's a question that I get asked a lot. You know, what the heck does a pharmacist do with MSF? And then I wanted to just briefly touch on the teams as well that I've worked with, just kind of highlighting the different profiles, because for me it is one of the most rewarding parts of the work. So I just wanted to briefly mention it. Of course, there'll be lots of pictures throughout. This one specifically is a picture of our project in Mocha, Yemen. So this is where I just was this year, an emergency and trauma surgical center. I will not be monitoring the chat throughout, and I am definitely going to go over time. I understand if you need to leave at any point, no worries. If you want to stay afterwards and ask questions, that would be great as well. All right, so first a disclaimer and then a bit of radical honesty. What I am talking about today are my personal experiences, my perspectives, and my opinions only. I am not speaking on behalf of MSF, although in some way I am a representative of the organization and I am using their PowerPoint template. But these really are my, personal experiences and perspectives. I am not a political analyst. My job with MSF is not to analyze, the security context. I just follow the security rules. So I'm not going to talk about, politics in any way, or the history that leads to conflict in countries, or religion, or any of these kinds of things. It's really just about the work that I've been a part of. And now for the radical honesty. When Jason initially asked me to do this presentation, I had only been home from Yemen for really a few weeks, not very long. And while I said yes, I said so hesitantly. And there's probably been at least 3 times where I've almost like marched down the hallway to his office and told him that I didn't want to do the presentation. But then I really thought that I was missing out on an opportunity to share a perspective that's really important. So I wanted to be honest about why I was hesitant. And the first one is, as I said, it's only been a few months since I returned from Yemen, and understandably, these kinds of experiences are really transformative. They have been for me. I'm not the same person I was before I started working for MSF. And they carry a lot of emotional charge. And it takes me time, to process, and to some degree, it's always there. It's always a part of me. And I was worried about getting emotional. And I can already feel it, a little bit in my voice. And but then I thought to myself, you know what? our world could use a little bit more vulnerability, and if I cry, so be it. Nothing wrong with that. And then as well, I wanted to share the hesitations I have, are more so the shortcomings of humanitarian work. Often it's seen, especially in Western cultures, as this very altruistic, self-sacrificing kind of work that people do. And I I don't want to paint this as an either or picture. This is a both and. There is benefit to this kind of work and providing medical assistance to populations that need it, but there is a downside, and it's a history, steeped in colonialism and power imbalance and racism. And a lot of these organizations, I know MSF is reckoning with that history now, and it's important, that that reckoning is happening. But I just wanted to, be fully transparent about that side of things, um, before I, speak about the work that I have been a part of. I've had to ask myself a lot of questions about my own white saviorism and medical tourism and the sustainability of the work that we do. And so if you can draw any parallels, in your own practice to that, then I will have, considered part of this a success. And then the other hesitation I often have is, I get asked a lot about my experience, but more so like, how was your trip is a usual question I get, which is like, it's totally a fair question to ask, but it's so much more than a trip. Uh, and people ask about, what kind of food did you eat and these kinds of things. And again, absolutely nothing wrong with those things, but I always want to get to that deeper question and, or the deeper questions. And I, like, suffering is ubiquitous. We all suffer. And the problem is that we have a really hard time looking at it. Like, we can't really acknowledge it in ourselves, and it's really hard to look at it when it's happening to other people. And those are the questions that I want to talk about, Or so, anywho, those are my hesitations. But I'm going to put some of those aside and now, get to the juicy parts. So, a very general overview of MSF. This graphic is taken right from their international website. So MSF is an international, independent medical humanitarian organization, so providing medical assistance only. The organization was founded, I want to say in the 1960s, I don't know the exact year, by a group of physicians and journalists who had been working in conflict areas and wanted to speak out about the injustice that they were seeing. And that was the beginnings of MSF. And now it has blossomed into really a huge organization. You can see here in the graphic that MSF is made up of tens of thousands of employees throughout the world. So, of course, the medical staff is an obvious part of needing to run medical activities, but they actually make up a small proportion of all of the staff who are needed to carry out healthcare activities. And we'll get into a little bit more of that. The principles of the organization, which I can tell you are top of mind all the time, are impartiality, independence, and neutrality. So care is provided to everyone, no matter the side of the conflict that you're on, no matter your sexual orientation, no matter your religion. Anyone who needs assistance receives it. Independence has to do with the ability to make decisions. So the majority of the funding that MSF receives is from private donations. It's not from governments or large corporations who could then dictate how money should be spent. It's very important for MSF to maintain that independence. So you can see again on the graphic a few statistics as far as the amount of consultations and admitted patients. Currently, MSF is operating in 72 countries around the world. You can see them here highlighted in red. Most often responding to conflict, natural disasters, epidemics like Ebola, or people who are excluded from healthcare, either just a neglected population or cut off because of lack of infrastructure. So a lot of the activities carried out are surgical, Often in many parts of the world, maternal and infant mortality is, ranks at the top of mortality in a country. And so a lot of what we do is maternal and child care as well. They do a lot of advocacy research, work with HIV and multi-drug resistant TB. A lot more now work in mental health as well, really recognizing the importance of that in conflict areas and many others. So that's just a general snapshot. So now I want to get in specifically about the places that I have been. So my first contract with MSF was in 2017. I spent 9 months in Sierra Leone. So for those of you who don't know, maybe you've seen Blood Diamond and that's your only reference for Sierra Leone. It's a small country in West Africa, deeply affected by civil war in the 90s and early 2000s, and then of course suffered greatly during the Ebola outbreak in West Africa not all that long ago. So of course, because of this Ebola outbreak, just when I went in 2017, it was kind of the tail end of that. A lot of Ebola projects were closing and we were transitioning to other activities. But the primary healthcare system is greatly affected by an epidemic like this, both because of loss of healthcare workers and because resources are just shunted, to responding to the epidemic, and primary healthcare is the first thing to suffer as a result. So when the 9 months that I was there, we were transitioning, like I said, out of Ebola activities, and we were planning actually to open a pediatric and maternal hospital in a city called Kenema. So the capital is Freetown, right on the coast, and then Kenema is more inland. So I got to walk on the site where the hospital would be built, plan for it, but never actually got to see it. But now I've had many colleagues who have been there. So just a few pictures because, pictures are the best part of a presentation. So this is one of the Ebola treatment centers in a city called Bo in Sierra Leone. I got to visit once. It was closed. It had been handed over to the Ministry of Health at this point, but wasn't being used. So these are just a few snapshots that I took when we were there. It's quite a feeling to walk through that site. Another picture, so this is one of the medical warehouse in Kenema where I spent many, many hours. And like I said, we'll get a bit more into exactly what I did later on, but that's the medical warehouse. And then there I am working on 2 laptops at one time. This is where I learned how to use Excel. And so as a pharmacist, I'm managing all of the medical stock, not just the drugs. I think this was a picture like the first time we did an inventory. They tell you before you go on your first contract with MSF that, what you do will be quite a departure from what you're used to at home. It's very true. I had no idea what I was doing. It's completely different than the work that I do here at home. So you have to be very self-reliant in figuring it out. So as well, in Sierra Leone, we had a second project that was what we call outreach. You'll hear me use that term quite a few times throughout the presentation. And so this was supporting the Ministry of Health to run 10 rural health posts. So these are very much primary care, run by healthcare workers, really with no formal training. We would call them community health workers, and then traditional birth attendants as well. So this area, this particular district, was fairly close to Kenema and was really cut off. There weren't like proper roads. You had to cross this quite treacherous river to get there on a very scary ferry, but that's a story for another time. And so really just supporting them with, building capacity of the healthcare workers, training, increasing infection prevention and control measures within the health centers, filling in gaps in their supplies. There's already a shortage of supplies, but then because the area is so cut off, it's very difficult for anything to reach them. So also providing them with medical supplies. So I have a few pictures here. I was lucky to visit just a couple of the centers when I was there. So this is in a town called Bama. So this is just a picture that I snapped of the town, and then this one as well as some of our guys putting up a rub hall, which would be like a warehouse where we were going to store supplies. And then this is the health center. So here again, primary health care, probably delivering, at least 2 babies per day in this health post. As well, when I was in Sierra Leone, there was a massive flood in Freetown, which is the capital city. This was in August of 2017. Thousands of people lost their lives in a matter of minutes. And I can bet that probably none of you heard about this one on the news. So basically what happened, Freetown, like I said, is a coastal city. It's built into hills, almost like mountains. And when it rains in the rainy season, it rains hard. And a lot of the settlements built into these hills are either squatters or they've obtained like illegal permits to build, and it destabilizes the sides of these mountains. And what happened in August is that basically an entire side of a mountain just gave way. So it was a massive landslide, and then it went through a valley, which was also settled with people, and just wiped out everything for an entire kilometer until it reached the ocean. So in response to this, the most immediate need is often clean drinking water. So of course, people are displaced, but the medical needs are to ensure clean drinking water so as to prevent a cholera outbreak. So because clean drinking wells were flooded and latrines can also be flooded, this of course increases the risk of cholera. So we went out on assessment asking people, if their wells were flooded and basically how they've been affected to figure out how to best respond. Were there, healthcare centers that were also destroyed? And do we need to respond that way? So you can see from this picture, this is one that I took. You can see people pulling bodies out of the water, and you can also see how high the water had come up against that building. You can see kind of the stripes of color, and it was that, the mud. You can see how high it came up. There were houses just completely washed away, just slabs left. Here you can see, again, some of the boulders that had come down off of this mountain and just destroyed everything. There was a bridge here that had been completely taken out. All right, so it feels a bit disjointed, but for the sake of time, I'm just jumping from one country to the other just to describe kind of some of the things I've seen. So the next place I went was South Sudan in 2019. So South Sudan is in East Africa. It's one of the youngest countries in the world, gaining its independence from Sudan in only 2011, and unfortunately has been plagued by civil war basically for the entire history of this young country. The humanitarian needs here are huge. So when I was in South Sudan, I was a project pharmacy manager. I guess I didn't specify that before. As a pharmacist, you kind of have 2 different roles. You can either be at country level or at project level. So within a country, you'll have various MSF sections. There's a specific one I work for most often, which is the section out of Belgium. And the Belgium section, for example, had 3 different projects in South Sudan. So you'll always have a coordination office in the capital where you have the coordinators for the various departments, medical, HR, logistics. And then you also, of course, have project teams that work directly in the project. So in South Sudan, I was a project pharmacy manager, and we had quite a big project. So I was in Maban County, which is in kind of the northeast of the country, not far from the border with Sudan. And I was in a refugee camp there called Doro. And these were actually refugees from the Blue Nile state in Sudan. So it's a disputed area between the 2 countries, and there was a lot of active fighting for many years. And so there was this refugee camp for people from the Blue Nile state. There was tens of thousands of people in this camp. And so a lot of different humanitarian actors present, and MSF ran a hospital there. I would say you could probably call it a secondary care hospital, like basic ER, inpatient department, what we called an ICU, but all you could really do was give patients oxygen. But nevertheless, it was an ICU. We delivered a lot of babies, had a small like neonatology ward, of course, a big outpatient department for primary health care, an inpatient therapeutic feeding center for malnutrition. You'll always have a lab as well, and then a big health promotion team who does a lot of education of patients and families within the hospital, and then they also are really active out in the community as well. So the hospital was the main activity. Then we also ran the outpatient department of our referral hospital. It was just a town really close by called Bunge. And so a lot of what happens, in this kind of work is really strengthening referral systems between centers. I mean, we can't refer to a hospital where the care is not good, so therefore we will also work to strengthen referral centers as well. So this is a picture of MSF Hospital. You can see like the main building in the back behind those tents is built of this material. Now I don't even remember exactly what it is. We call it Gap Tech. And then we also have these tents as well for overflow. Here's a picture from a different angle. The classic Land Cruiser that we drive everywhere in. And then this like brick building was the pharmacy, the dispensary. And this would have been what I guess we would call like the facilities management building for the hospital. This is a view from my room. So we lived in like our own little individual huts in a really large compound within the camp. And so this is, my morning view when I would come out of my room. You can see we had this like outdoor area that's covered where we would all like gather. There was quite a large international staff team, and we would like project movies onto the screen, or I forced everyone to play cards with me. So as well as part of our project, again, we had outreach activities to this area called the Blue Nile State that I was talking about before, where a lot of these people were coming. So working to strengthen health, I think there was 5 different health posts that we were supporting. And I was so fortunate that I got to go a couple of times. You really had to like monitor the security situation closely. Again, not my job. I just follow the rules. But it's really tricky to get there. So during the dry season, it's not so bad. It takes a long time, but there isn't proper roads, no tarmac, of course. And as soon as it starts to rain, the mud is like, they call it black cotton mud. You just sink. And the drivers that we have are so phenomenal, so well trained. It actually started raining once on our way home and we got extremely stuck, but they were total professionals and eventually got us home. So this is like the compound of the health post. These white tents are where we slept. We were there for about 4 days, so no electricity, no running water. This concrete building, kind of the right side with the grass roof, was the brand new pharmacy. So that's why I got to go, because I got to go help them like set it all up. It was super exciting. Here's a picture of the pharmacy from the front. So we basically, when we were there, did some training with the staff. We, of course, set up the new pharmacy. We also did a bit of a vaccination campaign for routine childhood immunizations. So the health promotion team goes out into the community, mobilizes people, lets them know that we're there, and then they would bring their children for vaccinations. So managing the cold chain when you have no active electricity was a fun job for me. And then I think, oh yes, I also included this picture inside the pharmacy. So you can see it's a dirt floor and mud bricks. So we had to put some proper protocols in place to make sure everything stayed clean. But this was a really exciting day, this new pharmacy. As well, I included this picture. which I didn't take. This was taken by a friend a couple months after I left. And this is in the town just beside where we lived, where I mentioned our referral hospital was in Boonge. This town was completely flooded during the rainy season. So this was just to drive home the point that um, these are the places in the world that are most drastically affected by global warming, and they are already feeling it, and they do not have the infrastructure to respond. We don't feel it that much here yet. These countries do. All right, moving to a different part of the world now. So in 2020, I went to Iraq. I was there for 6 months. I left in January of 2020, and we all know that many things changed in the world in the coming months. So what I thought I was going there to do completely changed. And so that's the name of the game with MSF. You must be flexible and adaptable. So I went there as the country pharmacy manager, and I was excited to do some antimicrobial stewardship. They had asked if I would, but then our activities changed. So, of course, we are probably, or most of you are much more familiar with Iraq and where it is in the world and some of its political history. So, of course, the country was greatly affected by conflict since the beginning of the 2000s. I said I wouldn't talk about politics, so I will not get into some of the reasons for that conflict. Um, and then specifically, we had our major project in a city called Mosul, which is in the north part of the country, not far from the border with Syria. And Mosul was, again, greatly affected by conflict in 2017 when the city was being liberated from ISIS. So a lot of infrastructure destroyed in that time. So we had a orthopedic surgery project in Mosul, which was also treating multi-drug resistant infections. It was a fairly new facility that was built. And so we had isolation rooms because of this. So it actually was perfect to convert it into a COVID isolation facility when the pandemic started. So we worked in collaboration with the Ministry of Health because the designated COVID hospital in the city was just beside us. So we isolated cases. Eventually, we also started treating mild cases of COVID as well. And then the other part of the city, across the bridge, across the river, we had a small maternity project as well. The first people affected in a conflict are women and children, and a lack of access to care for them. And so we were running this like basic emergency maternity obstetric small facility, and then a different MSF section had a larger maternity facility not far where can't speak, where they were doing C-sections, so we would refer to them if needed. So I actually ended up spending 4 months in Mosul because during the pandemic, the country just totally shut down. People could not come in, people could not leave. And so there really were only 3 people with medical profiles, international staff in all of our activities. So I ended up going to Mosul and supporting them in any way that I could. And then as well, we had a second project in Iraq. This was in Baghdad, in the capital, and it was supporting the National Tuberculosis Program. So this is doing things like building the capacity of the laboratory staff, implementing new equipment like gene expert machine, improving IPC measures, building the capacity of the clinical staff, doing training, supporting them to better manage their medical supplies and the way that they distribute to their peripheral centers, and just how they dispense as well to patients. So that's just kind of like a brief snapshot of what that kind of support to the Ministry of Health would look like. So this is a picture of one of the midwives dispensing medications in our maternity facility. This is one of my most favorite pictures of my time there. This was a sunset. I think I took this in April. This is from the roof of the house that we lived in Mosul. And this is a picture of the pink moss. So due to security rules, we're not really supposed to take pictures at all. But this was actually taken by the project coordinator. So she makes the security rules. If she took it, then I can use it. And this was one that I snuck from the roof of our house in Mosul. All right. So the fourth and final country that I have been to is Yemen. And I was in Yemen this year from January until July. And I went as the country pharmacy manager. So while many of you are probably familiar with Iraq, probably less are familiar with Yemen. It is a beautiful country, and unfortunately, it has been suffering with a civil war since about 2015. So although to the international world, it's, one internationally recognized country, it actually operates as two different countries in one. So I don't know if you can see my cursor, but I'm kind of drawing a bit of a border. So the north part of the country kind of slices the west coast here and just covers this northwest corner. The southern part of the country is this part underneath, and then all of this eastern part of the country. So while the north seems small, it actually contains the majority of the population. So civil war began in Yemen in about 2015. This is when the most active conflict took place in that year and the couple following years. If you ask people now, or you speak about war, they only think of the war that happened at that time, but there still is a lot of active conflict. There are active front lines that open up between north and south. And then there are also a lot of different actors involved, especially in the south, a lot of tribal conflict. And so it's super nuanced. If you're at all interested in this kind of stuff, I highly suggest you look into it. This history is quite detailed. And I mean, I was there for 6 months, and I think I understand like 1% of the context. I was actually told by one of our security focal points that when you feel that you start to understand what's happening in Yemen is when you get yourself into trouble, because things are always changing. So MSF has had various different projects in Yemen since that time. There's been massive cholera outbreaks as well since 2015. Specifically, again, the section that I worked for, we had one major project and we were opening a second one. So in a city called Mocha, which is on the west coast, directly like the Red Sea is just right there, and it's just like a hop over to Africa. We had emergency and trauma surgery hospital. So there was a front line that was not far away. It was about 40 kilometers. It was quiet for the majority of the time that I was there because there was a ceasefire between north and south. So we would receive cases. We had very specific admission criteria. So we would receive cases. We had actually the facility was it was all tents. So no like brick and mortar buildings except the pharmacy and a few other places. So a small ER, basic ICU, like level 1 care, an operating theater in tents, which was amazing. There was two operating beds. Then our maternity services were also greatly expanding, and I've kind of talked about the reasons why that's so important. And so we were actually doing C-sections as well in the OT, and then we were also starting an outreach component of a smaller health post about probably half an hour away, which is normally a referral center to us. So we were going to support the Ministry of Health to improve the care they provided, strengthen the referral criteria, and either refer people sooner or avoid referral altogether. Then the second project that we had, or we were trying to start, was in a city called Atak, and that's still in the south, but a bit more central in the country. And we were going to be working with the Ministry of Health to improve their inpatient pediatric care. There was one pediatrician for like an entire governorate of the country, and a lot of medical staff aren't being paid. There's gaps in supplies, a lack of IPC, so we were going to support there, and then again support these like outreach health posts to strengthen referrals and the care that they provide as well. So, okay, I lied. I do have one small stewardship point. So this is a picture of me in a community pharmacy in Mocha. So a lot of what I do is, ensuring availability of all the drugs that we need. And immediately after I arrived in the country and went to Mocha, they were like, "Oh, Kristin, we're going to run out of 10 different things that are like very basic things that we would need to do surgeries." So here I am scrambling, trying to find drugs on the local market, which come with a lot of risks, right? A lot of risk of counterfeit medications. And when I walked into this pharmacy, no word of a lie, 70% of what was on the shelf was antibiotics. And so it really was like this weight on my heart. And I took this picture of myself pointing at a box of cefepime, which if we were to use in Regina, for example, it would flow through, one of the ID pharmacists. It would have to be approved by an ID physician. And here, anyone can just go and buy it on the shelf and inject themselves at home. And so, no wonder we have a pandemic of antimicrobial resistance. And, this is a discussion for a whole other time as to why this is the way that it is. But yeah, love this picture. This is a picture of the pharmacy in Mocha. So this is a brand new building. Unfortunately, the previous pharmacy, there was an accidental drone attack a couple of years ago, and the pharmacy was destroyed. So this is a brand new building. As pharmacists with MSF, I think I mentioned, we don't just look after the drugs. The drugs are actually only this very first shelf in the whole pharmacy. We look after all medical supplies, every needle, every piece of gauze, every bit of physio equipment or biomedical equipment. So this is just kind of a snapshot of what the pharmacy looked like. And the other tricky part is in countries where the average temperature is over 40 degrees and the humidity can be 90%, drugs aren't happy in those conditions. And so a lot of what we have to do is ensure that we're properly storing things. Therefore, the pharmacy is always guaranteed to have an air conditioner. So I feel really fortunate to be a pharmacist with MSF because I always have AC. People are always coming to the pharmacy to try to talk to you so that they can get a reprieve. This is a picture of a mosque in Mocha. So it's a rare sighting to see me out. Due to security rules, we weren't really allowed to move anywhere other than the house and the hospital or the office. And so this was one rare occasion that I actually got to go out. This mosque is hundreds and hundreds of years old. The old part of this city is absolutely beautiful, and unfortunately, a lot of it has been destroyed due to conflict. So just a couple or a few more pictures. Again, this is that same day that we got to go out and dip our feet in the Red Sea among all the fishing boats. Again, a picture of the old part of the city and some of the destruction. And then this is a picture of some of the team that I worked with in Aden. This was a few weeks before I left. I was giving a training on good storage and distribution practices. So this is in our medical warehouse in Aden. This was just a fantastic group of guys to work with. We had a lot of fun. All right, so I've alluded to a lot of this already, but just to be clear, so the role of the pharmacist in MSF is evolving, but still quite technical. So basically, it's ensuring availability, quality, and safety of medications and all medical products. So our main mode of procurement of all medical supplies in the countries I've worked in, not all of them, but the majority, is to bring things in internationally. So they come from supply centers in Europe. But for example, in Yemen, I only placed 3 international orders per year. So everything has to last for, multiple months at a time, and it takes 6 months for things to even arrive. So the way we follow up consumption and and forecast our needs has to be accurate, because if we don't properly forecast, if we get it wrong, we will rupture, and then I have to get desperate and go to pharmacies and try to find things on the shelf, which is not ideal. And we don't have any like digital or electronic systems. There's no Pyxis machines to support us with any of this. So you become very proficient in Excel and analyzing consumption data. And then as well, working as part of the medical team to develop the strategy and ensure that this is in line with our medical supply strategy. So we basically create what we call standard lists for each project, which is like the formulary. So based on the type of activities that you have in a country, you create the standard list. So what we would need for the surgical project in Mocha would be quite different than what we need in a pediatric project in Atak. So you create the standard lists, and then you forecast needs based on this and place international orders. The pharmacist is also the focal person for good storage and distribution practices, so ensuring that we store things in a way that maintains the integrity of the products. Like I said, in places where temperatures are above 40 and things are dusty or it's humid, this is crucial to maintain the integrity of all of our products. And then, of course, as a manager, just managing people and teams, which is, part of is one of the most fun parts for me anyway. Okay, just briefly about some of the teams that I've worked with. So the medical staff, like I said, makes up kind of, in the grand scheme, a small proportion of all of the people that are needed to run activities. In Mocha, for example, we had like, I think 300 staff or something like that. So you obviously need a strong HR department to manage that. People need to get paid, and we need to buy things for activities. So finance. There's also a supply team who, as the pharmacist, I work very close with. So that's, they're in charge of warehousing, transporting everything, procurement, and, importation. And having to deal with importations of drugs in countries that have very unclear legislation is tricky. It's a bit eye-opening. Of course, we have operations as well, who are like in charge of security and are kind of the face of MSF and do all the liaising and networking. And then the logistics team, which basically does everything that everybody else doesn't. They're really a catch-all. So all of the technical people for like facilities management, managing cars, managing IT, they do so much. So all of these different backgrounds work with MSF, and the international staff, people like me, make up the minority of the staff that work for MSF. The majority are hired nationally. And so these are some of the teams that I've worked with. So this was just a picture in Yemen of some of the supply team and the pharmacists who hosted this lunch for me before I left. This was my small team in South Sudan. These guys were phenomenal. And this is also a picture in South Sudan of some of the international team that I lived with. These people you must lean on so heavily in the time that you're there. You become very close and try to have a little bit of fun as a reprieve. So here I am playing my ukulele on a weekend. And then this is the picture of the larger team in Mosul in Iraq in the orthopedic center. This for me, a question I get asked often is, what is the most rewarding part? And this is it for me. It is these people that I meet and that I work for. And it is so humbling to come in as an outsider and realize that you don't know what's best. You come in with all these ideas of how you want to change things, but you are not the constant in this place. And so you must come in and support in the ways that are going to be sustainable for the people who will remain there. A fantastic lesson to learn. All right, somehow I have managed to maintain a bit of a schedule here. I'm finishing on time. A question that I ask myself a lot is, what are the lessons learned for me from these experiences? And they are countless, countless. As I said, I am transformed. I am not who I was before. And I guess just to put it quite simply, my biggest takeaway and message for all of you is that as humans, there is much more that makes us alike than what makes us different when it comes to the things that really matter. So, what motivates us, the things that bring us joy, the things that break our hearts, it's not different. But as humans, we haven't really evolved past making a lot of decisions based out of fear. Whether we know we're doing it or not, it happens. And we fear things that are different from us and things that we don't understand. And so if I can give any message to all of you out of this 45 minutes together, it's to encourage you to develop a sense of curiosity and an open mind that is willing to be changed. And you don't have to go on grand adventures for this to happen. This is all around you. It's in your communities, it's in your workplace, getting to know people, understanding things that are different from what you know, beliefs that are different. It's so important, so needed. So that's my little soapbox message to round out my presentation. Somewhat finished on time, so I will stop sharing my screen, and if anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer. Thanks again, everybody, for listening.